everybody. Today we are talking about converting fractions, decimals, and percents. As a reminder, you do not need to write down every single thing we talk about in this video, but be sure to jot down important information and at least one example of each type of problem that we cover. Remember that you can also utilize the pause button to jot down important notes before moving on, the rewind button to view information again, and the fast forward button if you think you got it. But be careful and make sure you don't fast forward too much so that you miss out on anything important. So let's begin. You should probably already know a bit about fractions, decimals, and percents, but as an overview, here are some important vocabulary words you might want to underline, bold, highlight, and all that good stuff in your notebook. Fractions tell us the part out of any whole. They're very versatile. You can put any number on the bottom as the whole number. The top number tells us how many pieces, and then the bottom number tells us how many of those pieces are in the whole. So like 4/5 would be 4 pieces out of 5, but the whole is being divided into 5 pieces. A decimal also tells us part out of the whole, but here's where it starts getting more specific. For decimals, the whole has to be a multiple of 10. That's why for decimals you say tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and so on. So that's the rule for decimals. It goes by the base 10. And then when you get to percents, it's even more specific. Percents tell us the part out of the whole, but the whole has to be 100. So you can think about a dollar bill having 100 pennies in it, 100 cents in it. So that's percents. Also part out of the whole, but it has to be out of 100. Let's look at an example. Somebody might ask you to take a look at this picture, this tape diagram, if you will, and change it into a fraction, decimal, or percent. So to change it into a fraction, remember that fractions can have any denominator. Any number can be on the bottom. It is the part out of the whole. So how many parts are being shaded in? 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's how we got 4/10. You always want to reduce your fraction though. So here they're both even, so we reduce by dividing both top and bottom by 2, and you get 2/5 reduced. And it can't be reduced any longer. To change this into a decimal, we saw that 4/10 was highlighted, 4 out of 10. So what we have to do next to change it into a decimal is that we have to read it. This is 4 out of 10. The proper way to read it is 4/10. So in order to change 4/10 into a decimal, you would go back and think about where the tenths place value is. So I have this graphic over here. If you are somebody who tends to have trouble remembering the place value names, you're going to want to pause the video and copy down this graphic. So since this decimal's name is, or this fraction's name is 4/10, you would just put a 4 where you see the tenths value. And that's how we get 0.4 when you look at it. But this is also named 4/10 because it is in the tenths place value. Most people say 0.4, but then they have trouble understanding what fraction it came from. So the more you can read your fractions and your decimals the proper way, the easier it'll be for you to transfer, for you to convert them back and forth. By saying 0.4 doesn't help you remember the place value. For percent, remember that percents have to be out of 100. Our 4/10 as a fraction was so close, right? It was 4/10. So all we have to do is get that 10 on the bottom to a 100. 10 multiplied by 10 is 100. The top, the numerator, will also have to be multiplied by 10 because we want to keep those ratios equivalent. So instead of 4/10, we get 40/100ths. So then we get the top numerator As a hint as to what percent it'll be, it's 40% because the 40 was out of the 100. I cannot say it's 4% because that 4 was out of 10. It has to be the numerator when it's out of 100. 40%. Another way you could have done this was just to move that decimal point over 2 spots because there's 2 zeros or place values in 100. So whatever method works best for you. Okay, and we're going to go over some other methods as well in case you have trouble with these methods. The next example we're going to go over is going to overflow past one tape diagram. So think to yourself first what that decimal, that fraction, that percent might look like before I reveal it. It's going to be filling up one entire tape diagram and going on to another one. If you said that it was more than one whole or more than 100%, you are correct. Okay, so here we have 2 tape diagrams in order to contain all the shading. We have one entire tape diagram and then part of another. This is 10 by 10, so it's going to be 100 shaded in here. If you don't believe me, you can count, but don't waste your time. Here's 10 on one side and 10 on the other. So 10 times 10 means 100 total. So we have 100 here, plus another 10, and another 10, and 2. So it's 110, 120, 122. 122 is going to be out of 100. It's not going to be out of 200. Okay, so that's why the denominator is 100. The reason why it's out of 100 and not 200 is because one whole has 100. It's not talking about 2 wholes. For our denominator, we're always talking about how many pieces are in one whole. So it's going to be 122 out of 100. That's where we see the overflowing. One entire whole should be 100 out of 100. So 122 means that it's gone over the one whole. So this is a good thing to see the top number, the numerator, bigger than the bottom number, the denominator, because it shows us exactly what's going on. It's overflowing. Remember, for fractions, you always want to reduce. These two are both even numbers on top and bottom, so we're going to divide by 2, and we get 61/50ths. And I believe we cannot reduce that anymore. So that's the final reduced answer for fractions. So as a review, we counted up how many that were shaded, and then out of how many pieces are in one whole to get that fraction, and then we reduce. For the decimal, there's 2 different methods. We could do what we did before, so we took that fraction and we said it out loud. So now we have 122 hundredths, because 100 is on the bottom. And if we review our chart from above, we would see that hundredths is 2 decimal places over. So we're only going to occupy 2 spaces beyond that. 122 hundredths. So we're going to stop at the 2 decimal places after the decimal point. That's how we got 1.22. The other, probably faster way to change a fraction into a decimal is to take out your calculator and you're going to divide your numerator, 122, by 100. And that's how you can also get 1 and 22 hundredths. Okay? Oops, I said that one. 1 and 22 hundredths. I knew something was missing there. All right. So we could have done that as well up here. 4 divided by 10 to get the 4/10 or 0.4. 2 different methods here. For the percent, again, it needs to be out of 100. Oh, well, you look at that. It's already out of 100, right? So it's going to be 122%. So you really don't even need this part right here. As long as you can get it out of 100, you can write it down as 122%. It's just that number above the 100. Or you could take that decimal and you can move it over 2 spots for the 2 zeros or decimal or place values in 100, and you will also get 122%. And it is more than 100%. That's why it is a percent greater than 100%, 122%. So those are two examples on how you can move between fractions, decimals, and percent. Here are some, like a cheat sheet of how you can do that between specific fractions, decimals, percents, fractions, all that. So to convert from a fraction to a decimal, remember we just divide the numerator by the denominator. So 61 50ths, 61 50ths would just be 61 divided by 50 to get to that answer as a decimal. To move from a fraction to a percent, you would divide the numerator by the denominator. But remember, for percent, you need to move it over 2 decimal places. From a percent to a fraction, remember that the percent is going to be over 100. So you've got to put that percent over 100 and then just reduce. So there's a lot of just like little things you have to remember. But just remember that percent, you got to move it over 2 decimal places from a decimal. And then making it into a fraction, you got to put it over 100. For percents to decimals, since it's a percent, you got to put that 122% over 100. And then since it's a fraction, we can just divide top and bottom to get to that decimal. So it's just a lot of moving back and forth. From decimal to fraction, you can read that number out loud, and you would see that it is 24 hundredths. So you would change it to 24 over 100, 24 hundredths. Okay? So you got to know your decimal places. And then from decimal to percent, that's where we just move it over 2 spots. So in this example here, it's 0.4 or 4 tenths. If we move it over 1 spot, and then another spot, we notice there's no number there. So you just have to remember to add zeros if there's no number actually there. And then you just stick a percent sign at the end. If it has more than 2 digits, just know that when you move it over, it's going to have a decimal point there. So 321 thousandths would be moved over twice, and you get 32.1%, or 32.1%. So don't be scared if you see, uh-oh, there's more than 1 digit there that's left over. It's totally okay. There can be decimals in percents as well. Okay? So some of this you should have covered in 5th grade math. That's why I'm going it over really quickly. It's a lot of just practice. Let me know if you have questions as you work on this, and we can go over it together. But other than that, happy reviewing, and let me know if you have questions. I'll see you in class.